I grew up in Pune, born and brought up in Pune. Um, I grew up in a very conventional household. My father was a police officer, mother is a housewife. Uh, it's a very uh, sort of a traditional community. So the women are, just not so study oriented, but I sort of liked studying a lot. So I was pretty much the outlier of the family. So there was something weird about it, and what was weird was, what I really liked reading and studying. So that was the early period. We do the same. My mom's ultra religious, and so the concern of the household was not academic. This is a purely non-academic household. Do other things. So that was pretty much the start. I loved my teachers, the school teachers. I'm still in touch. Uh, every time I go to Pune, we still try and touch base, say hi. This is like a decade ago now, but that sort of helped. I mean, I absolutely loved the teachers. That kind of interaction, they knew us. Pune was a small town back then. Now I don't know how drastically different it is. But the teachers really knew you very well. I mean, they knew you more than your mothers would know typically. So that was just amazing. The schooling years were amazing. We do these projects, and so it was that the early education as well as the personal life was more busy about that. Studying was not the highlight for sure, nor was it rewarded. If if anything, it was penalized. It's like, she's wasting time studying all the time, not doing other things. So that was early, but growing up in Pune was really amazing. We had this British library where we used to spend hours and hours. You stop by for breakfast in Vaishali, and you continue your day. So your Sunday was spent in this 3 floors of books, and it was amazing. Um, it also gave, now when I look back, and I met somebody from Pune day before yesterday, and we were talking, and so that library, that's like a really non-happening library in that sense. It was just nicely located on Ferguson College, but we spend a lot of time there. A lot of people who are in academia today and who are from Pune, there's a pattern there. A lot of them spend time there. So it was just amazing coincidence. But come to think about it, the household which is not academic, I think spending time there just gave this amazing escape to a different world, right? I mean, at the end of it, that's what you need. Um, I think that was amazing. That place was amazing. In terms of the early life influences, I think spending time just in a library. So by the end of everything, I would knew which aisle would stock up which kind of books. That's how well familiar I was with the entire set. Uh, so I think that's pretty much it. Not too many early influences, because when you don't come from a family of academia, uh, even today when I go back for weddings and all, it's not a they don't care much about what where you teach and all. So my mom still introduces me as a school teacher. She says she's a teacher. She won't say she's a professor. So that kind of is the kind of family. So in terms of influences, being in Pune helped tremendously. There was this amazing Ferguson. So I went to Ferguson after the schools, and we start early, right? In Maharashtra, we start immediately after 10th. It's a whole new world. You met people, you met international students. Ferguson that time had a lot of international crowd. So you met people from Bangalore, and you didn't even know, like, Pune is so small, and everybody's so caught up in their own world. You didn't know where Bangalore was technically in school. When you're out of school, you knew where it in map, but you'd never met anybody from Bangalore, right? You met Pune people, you met Gujarat. Uh, so that Ferguson College and the years spent there, was certainly amazing. I met all kinds. I had a friend from Dubai who was coming and studying there. The kind of ways of life that she would narrate was amazing. That kind of exposure was fun, I think. I was actually a science student who shifted to psychology, to the greatest disappointment of my family, who thought, okay, at least she's studying, she'll make something useful out of it, right? So, but I shifted from science to arts to study psychology. Um, I think all that certainly was, I was interested in not looking in a microscope and understanding something, but I found this variation in people. In my own family, for instance, there's like a huge crowd, right? Four uncles and four aunts, and on both the sides. So you see this amazing variation in how people think and behave, and what are the ideas. That sort of was certainly the foundation of trying to study mind and mental behavior and how people behave, and there's so much of variation in it. And where does it come from? Like, for instance, I grew up among two boys, and it's a very different experience that we had of our parents. So, the experience of a mother for me as a daughter was very different from obviously the experience of my brothers. Um, it is so that sort of led me to move from science to psychology. We had a wonderful Ferguson College had wonderful department of psychology. We had this small cubicles where we could do experiments. One of the experiment I remember was about trying to plot pain thresholds. So this involves you pricking a little bit to the skin and trying to make a graph. At what point does the participant say that he feels the prick? So I somehow thought that there is a systematic way to understand variation of experiences, right? I I got completely hooked after that. Went to Pune University, did my master's there, did my first research there, and we had a professor there who was really the very different. She led a very independent life. She had one of the smartest car back then, and she was zipping in and out of the country, and all of a sudden you see that. And psychology classes, the classroom is completely filled with women. I mean, we had one boy who showed up and we sort of booed him away. So so for some reason psychology has traditionally attracted women folks, I think. uh, and to have this kind of a female faculty who led a life we couldn't think of. So here were a group of people who Pune culture is still very, close, right? So you had to take permission if you're going to stay out after 6 o'clock. And here was this female faculty who was zipping in and out of the country and had no, accountability. So that sort of uh, impressed on a lot of us. We really looked up to her. She was a very sweet person. So I think in terms of influences, we really think that that was one of them. All of us are now pursuing, we finished our PhD in psychology. We still remember her. And I think deep down, that certainly is an impression left there. I'm still in touch with her. She's a very sweet person. Uh, Strong feminist she was. Uh, Very interesting to interact with her. Uh, so that's about the early sort of influences. I think being in Pune was amazing. I mean, everybody was doing something interesting with their. So the career trajectory conversations were not so much about employment, but what excites people always. So there was this one classmate of mine, she wanted to study calligraphy. That's it. I mean, passionate about it with no sense of idea ki, are there prospectus to it or what would happen to it, or she just loved it. So I think that I don't know if it's still there in Pune, but I think Pune had a lot of this kind of passion for something very subtle, little, and no apology about it. I just like it and I will do it. So I think that was really freeing to think like that. When I met up my cousins who were in North, they had a lot of these set paradigms, right? I have to do this because that's a very hot thing to do. So I think, in a certain sense, just following whatever you loved doing was amazing for me, at least. I truly enjoyed doing that, wherever it took us. Uh, why did I make the switch? I truly, at that point, dissecting a frog was not something that was, because I was also being exposed to these huge variations. See, when you come from a conservative family and you enter the gates of Ferguson College, there's a complete paradigm shift there, which happens every morning to you, right? Science was, looking under a microscope was not the most exciting thing at that point. I was looking at people and I was thinking, look, how different is this? How different is this behavior? So I think rather than studying, very closely microscopic, I was very fascinated by broad, evident differences that were around me. So I think that sort of and in terms of pushback, see you the advantage of having a family who, for them, I was just keeping myself occupied. So whether it's she's keeping herself occupied with science or arts, it's all right. I mean, not much consequences, right? So you thought, okay, in any case, that's not going to go anywhere. So as long as she's happy, let her do whatever she wants to do was overall the idea. It was immaterial. Yes, certainly. My father did say like one word, saying, "Oh, we thought at least you'd be a doctor." So certainly that hierarchy seeps down. But I think if this would have been my brother who shifted, it would have mattered much more, for very obvious reasons. My mom studied after her marriage. I think. I think I must have inherited it from her. She she was 15 and a half when she got married, very early. Uh, she finished her master's in sociology after marriage, after we were grown up. And I could see that she was very, very happy. She came from a household. Uh, when she got married, she was supposed to do parda. So, you'd cover your hair. Uh, so that there was a lot of things that were happening. Women, so I come from a community, like I said, the it's not talked about as gender stereotype. It's very evident. It's obvious. It's given, and you'd work with that paradigm, right? So my brothers would go out for these camps in Pune, right? The summer camps. Uh, they would go out for overnight, and it was obvious that I wasn't allowed beyond 6 o'clock. But you didn't question it because that was the completely imbibed paradigm. There was no, if someone questioned it, I would find that odd. So my friends would say, "You're not allowed beyond 6. How does that work?" I said, "What's there to not work? This is but your brother's partying," you know. But there was absolutely, I can't believe today, obviously, that when you're 17, 18, for some reason I took it like, the way it was. I said, okay, that's just the way it works. Uh, so all my questioning attitude was left when it came to questioning the household, this thing, which was fascinating, right? So there was very evident, the raising. So I was, so my mother thought that I should join Kathak because, I was growing up with two boys and I would, be kicking ball and things. So there were ways to sit and all. So she's good old fashioned. So she said, "My God, this is going to be a problem. Let's put her into, what she says, a little femininity." So I learned Kathak for like 6, 7 years. Uh, it, it was interesting. So my boy, obviously my brothers learned football and I learned Kathak. So that says quite a bit. Uh, yes, I think I work across discipline very smoothly. Uh, I work with engineers. A lot of my research is with clinicians, engineers, social scientists. It's amazing how I don't actually see any disciplinary boundary, which is why sometimes I'm penalized by it because it comes with so much of ease. Maybe I'm also a product of another engineering institution, right? So I didn't do psychology in a traditional department of psychology for my PhD. I did it housed in an engineering environment where, so humanities and social sciences in a technical institution are constantly having to explain themselves a little bit, right? I mean, how is it that you're here? Uh, so your work, so you learned it quite early. So I did my PhD from IIT Bombay, and you were constantly asked, saying, "Okay, how is your work fitting into this?" So I learned that quite early, and I think I'm very proud of the fact that I could do that very smoothly. When you meet psychology from conventional department, there's a lost in translation when you're talking across discipline, because I'm sure it's there in all fields. Because if you're trained, maybe let's say in Department of Chemistry in a university setup, the kind of uh, engagement that you would have with other disciplines would be probably different. I'm not very sure, but uh, sure. So, what I do today, for instance, I'm interested in how, so broadly speaking, my research is about mind and body and how that translates into cognitive processes. We solve problems, we memorize things, we recall things, um, we are able to carry out this conversation meaningfully, I hope, because I'm able to produce language. So these are some of the cognitive processes that interest me. To be able to understand this, I have to talk to others who will help me understand this better. For instance, I wanted to understand whether, just to give you an example, whether a specific part of the brain is responsible for producing a specific kind of behavior. I look at how people make decisions. Now, to be able to rule out any other explanation than this neural explanation, I had to go and talk to somebody in Ames, where what they do is, as a part of epilepsy, which doesn't respond to drugs, medicines, they'll have to undergo a resection, a brain resection, a procedure, surgical procedure. Now, here's a way through which I could study what if something happens to the brain, what happens to the processes. Do people would I see a change in the way people make decisions now? So this is a successful collaboration between me and a neurologist, a cognitive neurologist, where both of us study these patients who have undergone these brain surgeries. We understand that we compare the processes prior to the surgery, post the surgery. It helps me understand, for instance, in what I do in normal healthy population, you see men and women make decisions very, very differently. Uh, there's a certain extent to which risk can be explained based on male and female. Traditionally, males tend to take more risk, female tends to be risk aversive. Now, why does this happen? There are multiple explanations for it. The way you were raised, conventional, there's biological explanation. And I'm sort of interested in trying to get the best explanation possible. So I wanted to rule out whole set of it. In one work, I tried to rule out socialization and cultural explanation. So what I did is we pulled data from Germany and from USA, two countries where you have gender equity, which is very different than what you have in India. And I thought that maybe this social explanation would help, and I would see very different differences emerge out of these in terms of male female differences. Maybe they will be reduced in some other country and they will be very sharp in ours. I was completely proven wrong. So Germany, which is a country which has traditionally a gender equity, which is quite nice, had the sharpest contrast of male and female decision makers, the kind of risk that they took. And we wrote a paper about that, but I wasn't happy with the explanations that I gave in that paper. So I thought that when you're talking about male female differences, what comes to your mind and what some people might mostly resort to is, well, there's biological difference, right? There's reproductive system, hormones, all kinds of interesting things that are body related. Uh, I hate to make this bifurcation of what's social and what's biological, that because the two are ingrained really closely. But let's, for the purpose of, let's say, theoretical elegance, you say, well, here are the variables which are completely social. So being born and brought up in a country which has a different socioeconomic climate will certainly play out differently. But at the end of it, we are comparing a woman with a woman and a man with a man, be it Indian or German, right? And there's something similar between the two men and something similar between the two women. And what we think is similar is biological factors, right? Such as hormones, sex related hormones. So then I went out to study the effects of hormones on risk taking. I was curious why men are able to regulate their decisions so well, because now I saw that they were doing it across three countries. Didn't matter whether it's India or Germany, they were still doing it better than the women. So then I thought I'll look at whether how do they, and traditionally men are supposed to take a lot of risk. And the cognitive task that I test, they were showing that they were making very safe decisions, which just felt very disturbing in an intuitive sense, right? I mean, men are most likely to be involved in road accidents. Men are most likely to be involved in addiction and drugs because we think that there's a risk-taking orientation thanks to a sex hormone such as testosterone that contributes to it and which is higher in males compared to females. So I wanted to really address that. I did take, so that's certainly one of the proud moments for a psychology to go to this level of explanation and say that cognitive process such as decision making and the kind of risk that you take can be explained with the help of hormones, a purely biological factor. So that was one paper that set me out to this kind of work where I interact with those from neurology. I work with, uh, so essentially when something is what we call the deficit model. So there's a surgery that's taking place in brain, which we think is the most important organ for cognitive mind and mental activity. I also have two PhD students. So there's something called the central nervous system. We think it governs everything. When you eat, when you give up eating, and what you think, and so on and so forth. So we think that, and that is a brain and a spinal cord. So I study what if something goes wrong in the brain, what happens to these cognitive processes, and if the brain was intact and the spinal cord was severe, how much of a deficit would you see? So I try and make this extremely quantitative sometimes, but to get a really good answer that when our body is experiencing certain things, that feedback is processed in a certain way and we act upon that feedback. For instance, we feel very uncomfortable in presence of certain people. There's no logical reason or pieces of information that we can pull up saying, well, here's what makes me feel uncomfortable. It's called the somatic feedback, right? We intuitively just somebody doesn't make us feel comfortable. So I wanted to study that feedback. That feedback has a systematic, like a traditional paradigm in which we study, which is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, the rest of the body. So I try and study some of that. It's just I take up questions that impact my everyday life. For instance, one of my first PhD student was very nice that time, plagiarized a proposal. And she was really a good student, and it stayed with me. I certainly took it up as a, failure to predict behavior, right? I mean, what better demonstration than that? Uh, so now I study deception. Why do people deceive? Why would they? I wrote up two papers pairing up with an economist, trying to study that. So deception is something which carries a lot of risk. If you carry forward with your lie, you're going to, obviously, there's rewards at the end of it, which is why you would lie, right? You cheat because it helps you skip efforts, and you're going to get immediate rewards for it, right? A grade inflation or anything. So you get away with something. So that's a pursuit of reward. But there's a probability of getting caught, which can result in huge penalties, right? Shame and all kinds of things. Guilt, shame are one of some of the emotions that are tied to it. So we study why do people cheat despite such huge risk. Um, we wrote up two papers. I don't know if this interests you, but in India, so we also compared it with reasons for cheating and deception in other countries. What's unique about us is that we cheat to get away with it, to see how much can we get away with. So there's this. So we experimentally tested by saying cheating for reward, cheating for no rewards whatsoever, but just cheat. So there's a nice traditional paradigm through which you can elicit deception. And we saw that people cheated for just to see how much can they get away with. And they also cheated to penalize a partner. So for no rewards of your own, just so you don't get anything, but you get to punish a partner. And people would cheat for that. So we're highly competitive in our culture. We're trying to tease out why should that happen, because again, that's ironic, right? We are called so socially embedded, and we care much more for each other apparently, and then we go on to use use deception to teach the others some lesson. Um, so that's something that I'm working on now. So I collaborate with an experimental economist in JNU, and some of the work is about that. So I take up questions that sort of I feel that apart from the theoretical elegance, it should also have some answers to it, right? Um, is it inherent? I wouldn't say so, or at least I have not verified whether it is. Uh, are we selfish? I guess I won't call it selfish, but in an environment which is resource constrained, you are going to see behavior that maximizes your own good. I think it's not a function of a trait, a dispositional trait as such. It's a function of the environment, I personally think. So if you create in a classroom competition for marks, and if the students believe that this is do or die situation, there's a stress now created, anyone will be able to cheat. I mean, I do think the onus of deception and cheating lies in the environment as much as on the person. Um, yes, you're right. There are a lot of theoretical debates. Are we good by heart and moral compass and all that? But frankly speaking, all that literature comes from the West, the value system and its intrinsic, uh, you know, good, the sense of good and right and wrong. To the best of my knowledge, whatever we understand of it, or at least whatever I understand of it, comes from the West. We really don't know how it plays out in our environment. And our environment is very different. I mean, I don't want to judge the students who have shown deception in these experiments. It's a contextual idea, right? I mean, where they come from. It's not fair to compare it with the Western theory. We've done it, um, but yes, that remains as something that I'd like to tease out for sure. Yes, women exclusion. I absolutely have a criteria now. All my PhD students have to find a gender balance sample. But I must, having said that, I must tell you that now I recruit undergraduates I'm situated in IIT. It's hugely gender skewed. So for me to dictate that let's have a gender balance sample might be easier for Caltech and other places, but this is India again, you know. So when this population is so skewed, how do I draw a sample which is not skewed? I landed up investing a lot of efforts. And to be fair, women don't participate in research that wholeheartedly. And I would like to explain that. I talked to some of them, I explained them. I said, see, we are not represented in these studies. We are missing out. People don't understand our thought processes. It's really self sabotaging for us to not contribute to research. But to be fair, this is what they explained. They said, I fought a lot to be here. This is not rewarding for me. So women who have made their way to the elite education system are absolutely no nonsense. I worked at IIMs for a while, 1.5 years, and have been in IIT now for quite some time. The two elite, institutions in India. Women are absolutely driven with a sense of urgency to, make a point and make something substantial. So this becomes peripheral to them. This is a long term goal, right? I mean, to improve the ecosystem for women, it's a long term goal. It's not an immediately rewarding goal for everyone. I do tell them now, these appeals have helped, certainly. I do see greater participation because I tried paying them 500. So I have good grants. I pay them, they still won't show up. Then I thought that, they're not here for the paid participation. I went with my RAs and I try and now give these talks and explain, saying that, listen, what happens to sleep? For instance, I run a sleep deprivation. One of my all meal papers are sleep deprivation. What happens to the brain when you're sleep deprived? How do you make decisions? Right? I just couldn't, for the life of me. I wrote 2 papers on this. Can't find women participants for it because they won't want to participate in a nighttime study. This involves me studying them at 2:30 in the night, right? Where we think that that's a phase at which most of the memory consolidation. So we deprive them at that point. I can't find women coming forward, but this is the time where I tried a different technique. Payment didn't help. I just went up to a bunch of women in women hostels and I told them, I said, see, there are pharmaceutical industry that makes drugs that compensate for insomnia, a sleep disorder, and we've got no idea what is the effect of that on a women, because just like this, women are not coming forward to participate in this research. As a result, we're not represented anywhere, and you're going to be penalized. You're consuming something which you probably is not tested on your sex, and our biology is different. um, that sort of helped. So I managed to get first time a gender balance sample for my sleep loss study, which is, small wins, I would call it. So how do I pay it forward? I have, I've also matured over a period of time. When I came here, I saw, I don't know what to call this phenomena, but women who've made it slightly at a competitive place tend to have no tolerance for failures and, trial and errors, and that penalizes other women. I learned it the hard way. I mean, I was extremely intolerant uh, to, because you're on a go, right? You're competing in such a space. You don't have time for hand holding. That's something that I have changed now. I, with tremendous patience, uh, indulge with. So if there's a girl who's writing up, if there's a girl in an interview panel, and I'm the only woman there, and she's been now heckled because she can't explain a regression or an error term. I intervene now. I said, it's okay. That's something she will be able to learn. Let's not penalize her for not knowing and the others to know. So, interview panels are also interesting spaces. Um, the minute, so this women and math thinking or statistical thinking, it's a troubled relationship, I must say, and not because of women's intrinsic lack of interest or ability or anything. It's just that, she learns differently, I feel. We learn differently about numbers, and statistical and analytical information is processed differently by us. Now, if she shows up in a interview where she's now admitting to it mostly, and women also admit to it upfront. There's no question asked on it, but she'll firstly go ahead and just go with the disclaimer saying, I'm sorry, but I have no understanding of the statistical analysis. Now, I don't know what is the need for us to say that, but that opens up a whole line of questioning just to re-emphasize what she's already stated. I I do try and now make that okay, saying that, okay, there are other aspects to research than just analysis. There's also thinking involved, creativity involved, problem solving involved in research, which she can bring in for sure. So if there's one domain that she doesn't bring in, she would bring in. I'm sure it's the same for both. The independent of sex, no person would bring in all the domains of expertise required for a task for which you're interviewing. But it's about balance. But I do feel that it requires a certain nudge. I find myself now nudging quite a bit, uh, or acting as a tiebreaker, saying, okay, certainly couldn't explain the statistical analysis, but she could explain something really well. And I think that's also important. How do I challenge gender stereotype? I think through work. I don't engage in. I find that we have so many conversations on it that the actions should speak. So a lot of my work, certainly, so I must admit and confess that earlier I wasn't interested in it. So gender for us is a covariate, which is a term that would just explain, make sure that we are at the right in explaining whatever we are explaining. So it was just FYI or by the way. But now I do carry out analysis that are more informed by the experiences of the two genders, slightly more. So that's how I think one can dispense gender stereotype. A lot of what's established in the literature comes by this really casual treating of gender as a variable. I don't plan to do that. I want to address it for its own merit rather than FYI. So that's one way that I'm trying rather than indulging in conversations. I think let the actions speak louder. So every paper that I write, I will have it addressed. In terms of sustainability, it's a challenge. I'm raising my kids in Delhi, uh, which is a land of everyone has a lot of everything. I feel I grew up in Pune. Luckily, again, that no nonsense. It's okay. We'll just make this work. I'm going to raise the children, at least in my personal life here in Delhi, like the Pune way. I said, well, if it's broken, we'll mend it. So I stitch their school bags. I said, well, just because it's torn a little bit, we don't throw it away. We mend it. I really love mending. I do it hands on. Um, that sort of is percolating to the kids for sure. With students also, I use a laptop. We get a fund. I have 3 projects, uh, but I'll reuse a system when it solves the problem. I don't see why we need to upgrade constantly. So this constant upgradation is something that I don't support. So I'm conserving, reusing whatever I can. I would certainly do that. So that's the sustainability in personal life as well as professional life. I keep telling, even if it's a PowerPoint, I said something that you can show simply. Please don't use lots to say the same thing, right? I mean, there's no point. So conserve as much as you can, whatever you can. I think if I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm extremely hardworking. I don't know whether I'm smart or not, but very hardworking. I mean, and I like understanding something. Like I can't sleep if I have not understood it. And I've not explained it at least to two different perspectives. So I really, in that sense, I'm sincere. Like I don't want to just explain things to psychology. I want to be able to get the biologist on board. I want to be able to get the engineers on the board. So I want to produce an explanation of a phenomena which satisfies at least two disciplines, somewhat. It's very, like I said, if you just take gender, such a crowded conversation, everybody has a say in it. uh, so you need to produce a result that satisfies at least two different stakeholders or disciplines and their concerns. So in that, I'm sincere. I don't take the shortcut. I won't say that, okay, bas ab itna theek hai, acha hai. So I'm gonna go ahead and do more and more and more and more, and get more people aligned to saying that here's what I found. What do you think? Take risks. Don't hesitate. I think we hesitate a lot. A lot of missed opportunities. Uh, it's also cultural. I don't know the reason, but one should take calculated risks for sure. We don't encourage it enough for very obvious reasons. I hope the environment also changes and facilitates all of us to take risks, independent of your gender. Uh, I do see it, in men also. We don't take enough risks. One failure, there are plenty. The one that I can think of is, so I write a lot of grants. Amazing set of ideas that I think they're amazing. It's very difficult. And also, because as you'd notice, it's interdisciplinary, right? So my failure to impress upon people that this is important to, so many fields. In terms of interdisciplinary, we immediately term those people as confused. They're neither here nor there. They're talking all generic. Luckily, in my case, I published. So no matter which field I take, I'll pick the topmost journal as much as I can aspire, and I'll, make a dent there. But the failure is certainly to try and produce this kind of work, get people interested in it. People think interdisciplinary is risky. So I have now two students who are trained in biology, but now looking at these problems from a social science, a psychology perspective. And, it's risky for sure. I mean, where do they find jobs at the end of it? And what is their career trajectory? So that is a risk that I'm able to take in very small measures. I hope I'm able to get a lot more people to do this kind of work, solve these problems. I've not really succeeded well there.